So imagine getting on a ship for weeks to traverse across the ocean, to just stop in the most random inconsequential place that you can imagine and just bobbing up and down in the middle of the ocean, lowering hundreds and thousands of meters of drill tube and drill cable to get to the seafloor, to then drill hundreds of meters into the floor to pull up this specific piece of mud. Hey everybody, welcome back to On 2 Feet. So in lieu of my typical type of content where I talk about various adventures on the motorcycle or on trails or whatever, I thought today I'd give you a little peek into my research and academic world, since I don't really talk about that stuff very often. So a couple years ago, I was able to participate in a really fascinating research expedition on a large drilling vessel off the coast of Antarctica. The ship was called the Joides Resolution, and it was part of the International Ocean Discovery Program drilling operations. So basically the ship goes around to different parts of the world, different oceans, places of scientific interest, and drills down into the seafloor to recover sediments that can then be examined by dozens to hundreds of different labs for various properties. Some people look at microfossils like diatoms, other people look at the different sedimentology or the structure or pore water or chemistry, all sorts of different things. So I wrote a small proposal to look at the essentially the pore space. So looking at the physical properties of the sediment to get at things like porosity and permeability, to try and kind of back out what the sediments have gone through in the past. These sediments are right off the coast of Antarctica. The idea here is that the ice sheet has expanded and then retreated, and every time that it moves over the top of the sediments, those sediments get compressed a little bit. So the idea was, I wrote a proposal to take a bunch of these samples, bring them back to my lab here in New Hampshire, and scan them with an instrument called a micro CT. So just like when you go to the doctors and you get a CT scan, same exact technology, except this is a very small unit about the size of a toaster. You put a small sample in and it's able to basically scan that sample at a resolution as high as 1 micron per pixel. So it can get really, really, really small detail, which of course is important because most of these sediments that we're pulling up are clay, and clay has very small grain size. So what you can see here, these are all the samples that I have to measure in the micro CT, and I've been here for a few days and I've already been kind of cranking through. So I'm just gonna kind of show you what is involved with running one of these samples. It's mostly just sitting in front of a computer running image processing software, but it's still pretty fun, and it's nice to be up here. I'm really enjoying the cloudy, rainy weather after living in Arizona for 2 years. It's a little bit refreshing to just get some overcast skies, but I'm also missing my home and my trails and the Himalayan. So while I'm here staring at the screen, I'm dreaming of ripping it up down the trails on the motorcycle. But at any rate, let's go over to the micro CT and I'll load a sample so that you guys can see how the machine operates, and then we'll go out to the computer and I'll show you how we process a sample. Okay, well, we're in the micro CT room. You can see the instrument right here. It's a SkyScan 1172 made by Bruker. I'm gonna take the sample that I have in this little tube here and mount it on the stage. But the first thing that I want to make you guys aware of is that I'm actually in a freezer right now. So the lab that I used to work at, Krell, which is where I am right now, I'm back here to run these instruments, or to run this instrument, is the Cold Regions Research Lab. So while I was here, I typically would measure properties of snow and ice cores and things like that. So all of the instruments are kept in freezers so that you can measure snow without it melting. So it is actually about, I think it's about minus 15 C in this room right now, so it's very cold, but thankfully I only have to be in here for a few seconds at a time to load the samples. These samples don't need to be kept cold per se, but it doesn't make sense to shut the entire freezer down just to run these samples. So each sample takes about an hour to scan. So I'm gonna go ahead and load this, and then we'll go out and we'll scan it. Okay, loading the sample on the stage. Thankfully, there's no exposure to radiation or anything like that, no dangers. It's all shielded. And when it's actually scanning, everything closes and it's all lead lined and everything. So sample is on the stage. We're gonna go out basically just outside that window out there and start up the software. First thing we have to do, obviously, is to write down the sample. So this is the sample, and I'm keeping a log here in my book, but I'm also keeping a log on a database. The sample has now been logged, and now we've got the software up and running that will actually do the scanning. I'm just closing the door now, and once the door is closed, I'll be able to do a reference scan so that we can see what the image looks like quickly before we actually start the full scan. So I'm going to snap an image very quickly. It basically just zaps the sample with a brief amount of X-ray radiation, and as you can see, there's the sample sediment. Okay, we have started the scan, and it's going to take 50 minutes to complete. So while that's running, we can go on and process some of the other images. Okay, so what you're looking at now is I'm running the second piece of the software. This is the reconstruction tool. So what this does is it takes all of the stacked images that the micro CT took during its processing, and it basically stacks them all into a three-dimensional model. So that's what it's doing right now. And once this is done, the final step is to basically open the software in the image processing component. And it's in that last piece where you can run all the statistical analyses on the three-dimensional object. You can look at porosity and permeability and object orientation and all sorts of physical properties. So that's the last step. I'm not going to actually show that because it's just really complicated and confusing, but I just wanted to at least show you guys this step because I think it's really important. Is basically what it's doing is it's taking thousands of two-dimensional images and stacking them together to make the 3D model reconstruction. So there you go. So I want to show you something. Take a look at this. What you're seeing here is a three-dimensional scan of a piece of an ice core, and every one of these little white dots is one of the bubbles that's trapped in the ice core. And I can sit here and spin this thing around in 3 dimensions and then also run processing software on this sample to learn all sorts of statistical properties of these bubbles. I can learn their number, their orientation, their distribution, their nearest neighbor, all sorts of cool stuff about their physical properties. And that's just this one sample. So this is why I love science so much. I'm staring at ice core bubbles from a sample taken from South Pole here in a lab, and I'm able to learn so much about what's going on in the ice, even just from a physical properties perspective. Cool stuff. So I'm standing back here in the freezer where I've got my samples laid out, and it occurred to me just how ridiculous this entire situation really is when you take a step back. I have a very profound fascination with sort of very remote places and kind of extreme geographical oddities and just getting out to very weird and random places. So as I'm sitting here and I'm literally holding this sample that just looks like a block of mud that could be from anywhere, it occurred to me that I'm holding here in northern rural New Hampshire / Vermont. I'm right on the border. I'm holding this piece of mud. It just could be any piece of mud, right? It just looks like random dirt, basically. Yet, this piece of mud came from 400 meters below the seafloor, right? 400 meters below the seafloor, in probably the most remote place of the Southern Ocean that you could go to on this planet. So imagine getting on a ship for weeks to traverse across the ocean to just stop in the most random, inconsequential place that you can imagine and just bobbing up and down in the middle of the ocean, lowering hundreds and thousands of meters of drill tube and drill cable to get to the seafloor, to then drill hundreds of meters into the floor to pull up this specific piece of mud. And now here I am sitting in a lab in New Hampshire, scanning it with high energy x-rays. It's just mind-boggling to think about how random order of things that had to come together for me to be standing here in this freezer right now holding this sample. I love that kind of stuff. I love it. I love how ridiculous and almost serendipitous that this has become. And now I get to run this and see what I can learn about it. Cool stuff. I love science. This is why I went back to graduate school to become a scientist, right here. Okay, back from the lab here in my Airbnb, and I did remember to bring my hard drive with me. Something to keep in mind if you're ever interested in doing this type of image processing is that every single one of these scans produces about 20 to 30 gigabytes of data. So it doesn't take long to fill up a 2 terabyte drive. So you've got to have quite a bit of storage in order to be able to do this type of processing. But with that said and that out of the way, I've had a great experience at the lab. Everything's been running smoothly. I'm already about a third of the way through my samples, and I really enjoyed talking through this and kind of sharing with you all some of the things that I get to do while I'm here at the lab and on some of my research projects. So with that out of the way, I am absolutely thrilled, jazzed to be back here on the East Coast, back in the mountains of Vermont. I do love my home in Flagstaff, but man, have I missed it here. And so I'm going to spend the weekend just hiking on some East Coast trails, exploring the Green Mountains, getting in some good trail running, and just visiting some of my local stomping grounds around here, just across the border in Vermont. So thank you so much, and take care, and of course, be safe.